experience with artificial intelligence. I've tried out the free tools available on the internet, such as ChatGPT and Gemini. I've also tested Photoshop's generative features and Midjourney. I'm interested in AI because it's an evolution in technology, and I like to learn about how that can change the creative process for better or worse. As a designer, I'm excited to find ways to formulate and test ideas more efficiently. That tends to be the bottleneck. In the past, I've taken a course on AI for product development. It pretty much was about matching the algorithms to use cases. Now, on to the competitive analysis. Now, I did all four GPTs, and I'm glad I did because I got to see how different Claude was. So, the original prompt that I used was summarize the causes of the Civil War, and the elaborated prompt was in less than 200 words, summarize the top two causes of the American Civil War. As you could see, what I'm testing here is the effects of output length and prioritization. Now, what's interesting is that ChatGPT, Gemini, and Copilot are all pretty similar in their approach. Their original responses are all structured as a list, as you could see, all list, right? And then what's interesting is that the elaborations tend to be just the first two items on the original list, with the other items being lopped off. So with Copilot, right, there's 1 through 6, and they even keep the same numbers here, 1 and 2. It's slavery and states' rights. Same thing with Gemini, right, 1 through 5. They kept 1 and 2, slavery and states' rights. ChatGPT, same thing, 1 through 6, but then slavery and states' rights remain the top two. So you'll also notice that content-wise, though, it's not just the fact that they lopped off, the last few items, but that content-wise, the content is very much the same, right? As well as the way it's expressed, which isn't too impressive. So let's take a quick example here. Let's look at ChatGPT, right? And under states' rights, there's this line that says, which led to tensions with the federal government. Now you go down to states' rights here, and what do you see? Led to heightened tensions with the federal government, right? It's the same line. In Gemini, right here, we have this line on the South's economy was heavily reliant on slave labor, and many Southerners feared the federal government would abolish slavery. Right? What do we get in the elaboration? Well, it's how much of a change is that? What sort of like elaboration do you get here? It's just the same thing. The South's economy was heavily reliant on enslaved labor, and many Southerners feared the federal government would abolish it. And you're going to get that in Copilot as well, right? Real quick. In Copilot, you have under states' rights, southern states, well, yeah, right, yeah, states' rights here. Southern states favored greater state sovereignty, especially regarding the decision to allow prohibit slavery. And again, same thing here. Southern states advocated for greater state sovereignty, especially regarding the decision to allow or prohibit slavery, right? Now, there is some variation that might reveal the different approaches of these models. Gemini's section on states' rights elaboration, right, is actually kind of interesting, right? So what it does is that it takes item 2, states' rights, and synthesizes it with number 4, about the election of Abraham Lincoln, right? So even though these lines here are about states' rights, note that it says the election of Abraham Lincoln was a threat to slavery, right? And it triggered secession of several southern states. So the synthesis is interesting. And another item, of course, that's interesting is with Copilot, there's repetition, but the repetition seems to be linked to the fact that there's these references. And of course, references are really helpful because it validates, provides some sort of like social validation, right? And so here we have what with states' rights, southern states favored greater state sovereignty, especially regarding decision to allow or prohibit slavery. And like that's also the thing that's being like reiterated here, right? Southern states advocate for greater state slavery, especially regarding decision to allow or prohibit slavery. So it's kind of good that there's some redundancy. Now for sort of like the main like thing that I want to point out was how different Claude is, right? So as you could kind of see already from the get go, it's really different. Um, Claude has these really short like bullet points on six like factors of the Civil War, but here we only get two, and each one is like what four times like longer than the original, right? So you already know that there's going to be something different. And what's key too, right, is not just the length is different, but you're going to have these different concepts. So you look at slavery, right, in the original, and it's focused on expansion. Here, when you look at slavery, it talks more about economy, social structure. Of course, it does include expansion, but look at this. It has stuff like morality and constitutionality and Abraham Lincoln, right? So Claude's done quite a bit of like quote and unquote like thinking. Um, and I also want to note the fact that, sure, like maybe the difference here is because of like length, right? If you notice in the other GPTs, like the original gets to play with a lot more text than the elaboration, whereas in Claude, maybe the sizes look about like the same. So maybe what we're really saying is that okay, given that I have that Claude has to condense the information into 6 points, it keeps things very high level, right? And so therefore, you can't like really have the same content. But what's very telltale is that if you look at the conclusion statements, yeah, those are really short. And so maybe they should be the same, right? But no, they're not. Look, the original talks about the next event in the Civil War, right? It's that the factors led to the Southern states like leaving. But in the elaboration, it goes on to talk about these new concepts about interconnectedness as well as ideological and political divide. So it'd be very interesting to do some research on what and why Claude does things differently. All right, so that was the analysis. Now for some reflections. So I think conversational AI is getting really good at mid-form responses. I'm impressed at how coherently it can string together multiple sentences. So that would be very good at extending autocomplete capabilities. Now, prompt sensitivity. Prompt sensitivity is key. In the real world, we like to do things case by case, right? So nuances in language would provide an interface to account for those case by case situations. Although secretly, I do like the repetition sort of approach. It kind of simplifies life, right? All questions should be like the same. Um, why do we have to get into all these details? I don't know what I'm going to do with the details. Okay, up next is like ethics. I think AI can be used for social engineering. If it's too human, you might actually trust it as a data point, and that can be used to say sway important decisions. Right? I think that's always a big concern, especially right now as we're in the United States approaching election. Um, and okay, lastly, bias or bias and societal impact. With bias, bias is as the data is as sorry the LLMs are as biased as the data that they work with, right? So what's fascinating in the tests that I did, as simple as they were, was that they took my prompt that was just about Civil War and already assumed that it was going to be American Civil War. So we have this American bias. So I sure hope the kids that like do these exercises doesn't copy these responses like literally and then post them for their Spanish Civil War homework. Right, it'll be completely off. Finally, for societal impact, I think conversational AI would be a great way to democratize information. So if the internet gave everyone access to similar data, now everyone gets access to similar curation and synthesis of data for their everyday communication. All right, thanks for listening.